Thank you for coming tonight. I know it's a warm spring night, hard to keep people inside. It's great to see everyone here, especially guests. If you're a student of Blair and you want some advice about colleges, we have Princeton, West Point, Harvard, all here, all reps, ready to talk to you later, if you'd like. Welcome. The James Youngelson Lecture Series was established in 2009 to honor alumnus Jim Youngelson, class of '53, sitting right here. He is an attorney and former president of the Morris County, New Jersey Bar Association. Established by Mr. Youngelson's sister and late brother-in-law, Jonah and Jonah Sherman, the lecture series honors Mr. Youngelson for his service to others and desire to inspire in young people the ideals of justice, responsibility, and service by featuring speakers whose lives embody those ideals. I know people who were here last year remember our 9/11 responder, and people who were a little older remember some other memorable evenings at Blair. All those talks focused on ethics and responsibility. Sitting here is Jim Youngelson. You should know that he was a former trustee of the school, a loyal alumnus, and someone who was instrumental in pushing for a co-ed institution in 1970. Thank you, Jim. Women of Blair, take note, and guys, of course. I went to an all-boys school, darn. Yeah. Very nice. Tonight, we have an old friend of Blair's, Charlie Putkammer, who also happens to be a Harvard rep, but he's here to introduce Walter in a way that I can't. He knows Walter well, and as Walter told me, he's really the impetus for the creation of the P.D. Green program, a wonderful organization helping people to move up in the society. I give you first Charlie. He's going to introduce Walter. Charlie, please.
I have to say that when Cordy and I, my wife and I, were at the Inn at Norris Pond for 13 and a half years in the 90s and until 2007, we had a lot to do with Blair, and for us it was sort of a place where we knew we could find good people who we could really talk to and make friends with. So it's so great to be back down here. And I have to thank you, Mr. Youngelsson, for your program that has brought us here. Very briefly, Cordy and I and some of my class of 1958 classmates at Princeton started a program in 2007 to have Princeton students tutor people that were incarcerated in Alfred C. Wagner and Garden State, which are places where younger people are sent for their first, hopefully their last term in prison. And of course what we found was that undoubtedly the tutoring for GEDs did some good to the inmates, but the real, I think, special benefit was to the Princeton students that met people that they otherwise wouldn't have met. And they probably have gained for life something that hopefully they'll have an impact on in terms of helping people that have gotten off to a bad start in life, but who can redeem their lives and become valuable citizens. And I urge every student here to take it upon themselves when they're still students and when they're adults in their professions or businesses to keep in mind that there's far too many fellow Americans who are in prison. It's said to be about 2.3 million in prisons. And to a remarkable degree, it's necessary for them to have some valuable time while they're in prison so that when they get out, as almost all do, of course, they're able to have productive lives. Well, enough of that. Our speaker tonight is Walter Fortson, who's an honors graduate of Rutgers University. And after that, he received a very prestigious Truman Fellowship to go to Cambridge, England. And he had his year there, and now he is a what we call a regional field manager for the Petey Green project. So I'll turn it over to Walter, and he'll have some interesting things to say. Incidentally, he took the photos here.
Thank you, Charlie, for that introduction. Can you give Charlie another round of applause? Dr. Miller, for inviting me to speak today to the Skeptics Society. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's truly a pleasure to be here. This is a wonderful campus. I was in high school not too long ago, and my campus was not this beautiful. So consider yourselves very, very privileged to have such a great place to learn. I know we just had dinner too, so when I was at Rutgers, I studied physiology, so I know that a lot of you guys are dealing with an insulin response now that's going to put you to sleep if I talk too long. So I'll try to be very quick, and I'll try to be engaging, and I try hopefully not to put you to sleep. It was just a few years ago. I mean, I'm not going to really get into my age, but just a few years ago I was in high school, and I know that these lectures can be quite boring at times, and you just do it for extra credit. So hopefully this can be engaging as well. And by the way, being an adult is overrated. Take your time growing up. Enjoy life. Enjoy childhood. After it's all downhill from there. So, as Charlie mentioned, though, my name is Walter Fortson, and I am the Petey Green Regional Field Manager for New Jersey. My job basically consists of taking as many undergraduates as I can and getting them pumped up to go into prisons to serve as tutors. And there's a reason that I'm passionate about this that I'm going to get into, but just let me give you a little bit of history about myself. I grew up in Philadelphia, PA. Anybody from Pennsylvania in the house? Woo! Go Eagles, no Steelers. Definitely not Cowboys. If anybody's a Cowboys fan, please leave the room now. Okay, so we're off to a good start. So I was born and raised in Philadelphia, and I grew up in a what I guess most would consider a lower middle class home. So I mean, you know, there's a lot of ambiguity about what it is to be middle class. So just to give you an idea, my parents, you know, we weren't financially independent, but we never had the lights cut off. You know, my parents, you know, provided food and shelter and clothing for us, lived paycheck to paycheck, and you know, struggled to provide the best upbringing that they could feasibly could with the resources and the access to opportunity that they had. That said, my father worked 3 jobs. He was a paralegal during the day as his day job. He was a choir director at night, and on the weekends he freelanced, so he did weddings and funerals and such. And my mother was, for the better part of her career, administrative assistant at a hospital. And together they provided our life, and my parents knew the value of a good education. In Philadelphia, it's no secret in Philadelphia that the inner city schools are just plagued with substandard academic achievement for a myriad of reasons. And my parents figured, you know, if I was going to have a fighting chance at life, if I was going to have a better life than they did, then they would, you know, come together, put their money together, and send me to a private school, parochial school. I was educated in the Catholic school system. So like any kid, like I couldn't care less. I didn't know anything about life. So I was just going through school. I mean, and I did well, don't get me wrong, I did well, I appreciated it, but I didn't appreciate it like I appreciate it now, given that I know what I know about the world. And so, in high school, I was very athletic. I played basketball for 4 years, and I played football for 1 year. Any basketball fans in here watching playoffs? How many guys know Kyle Lowry? Just, made it to the All-Star game this year. We played high school ball together. I'm a year older than he is. He's a junior, but we both went to Cardinal Doherty High School. So that was an experience because we had like a ranked team and we went across the country and did amazing things. I was a bench warmer though. I got no time. With guys like Kyle on the court, I got no time. So it's like, geez, man, I worked all this time to, try to get 30 seconds at the end of the game and Kyle's still in the game. Like, come on, dude. Anyway, so I graduated. I graduated from high school, and I got accepted to college, and I was ready to go. I would have been the first in my family to go to college, and I wanted to go to Drexel University for computer engineering. They had a great program. It was a 5-year program with summer co-ops where you actually got a job over the summer working with an organization to hone your skills so that when you graduated, not only did you have your degree, but you had, the correlated experience so that you could get right into the workforce. And so my first day at orientation, we were going through the programs and they got to the tuition part. And I had no clue about, this whole financial aid business or how I was going to pay for it. My parents definitely couldn't pay for it. And so they flashed this figure on the screen, $35,000. And so I did the math in my head, I'm like, 35,000 times 5. Wow, that's a lot of money. I stopped counting after a while. And I decided that maybe at this point, since I can't afford it, college isn't where I'm supposed to be. So I started to work and I started to do other things. And I quickly realized that there was no way that even if I tried to work, I was going to save up the money to go to college. But I continued to work because I'm 18 years old, I'm an adult now, I have to feed myself. So I finally landed this job. at an elevator company where they actually had a benefits package where they pay for you to go to school. When you guys start working, you'll learn about benefits packages and how they're important in 401ks and such. So in the benefits package, they were paying for me to go to school. And so I started for a while, but it was boring. I was at Temple University and I was studying business management. And, again, for me, getting good grades wasn't really a challenge. I mean, thank God I've been blessed with a mind that's wired in such a way where I can remember things. Once you say it one time, I got it. Like, I don't need you to say it 3 times, I got it. And so it just wasn't moving fast enough. And I'm thinking like, okay, I just did a year and a half and I have 40 credits. I mean, I gotta do this till I get 120? Nah, I'm out of here. I'm out of here. I can figure out a way to make money and live a productive life without college. My 18, 19-year-old head, that's what was going on. And so I left, and then I started to make some really unproductive decisions with my life. And it didn't start right away. It started because of this idea about being financially independent. I kind of started to fall in love with it. I don't know if any of you have been up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you see those commercials, come to this seminar and learn how to flip houses or do this or do that, and you'll gain financial. I kind of got obsessed with stuff like that. And so I wanted to be financially independent, and I was like, well, enterprise, that's the way you do it, gotta start a business. And so I saved up some money and I started to go to little auto auctions, and I would buy cars, like $500 for a car. $1,000, I mean, it won't drive 5 miles, but hey, it costs $500. So I would buy the car and I would, take it to a mechanic and he would fix it so that it can go 200 miles instead of 5. And we would try to sell it for a profit. And that was pretty cool, just trying to do stuff like that. But I didn't know you needed a license to do that, actually. You got to actually register with the state to actually be a car dealer. So that business flopped. Then I got into another business. I took all my money out of cars, and then I started to buy sneakers. I went up to Manhattan and talked to the guys on the corner, and they had like secret warehouses. They had boxes of sneakers everywhere. And I was like, okay, well, I have $6,000. How many sneakers can I buy with that? They said about 250 pairs of sneakers. And this is like, to give you an idea of where it was, this was around 2005. So eBay was like really big. And you can sell anything on eBay and nobody cared. So I was out there, every 2 weeks going up to New York, buying all these sneakers. I had this van. I saved one of the cars I had was a minivan. I took all the seats out of it except the driver's seat. And I packed it with sneakers. And I drove up there every 2 weeks and drove back, took pictures of them, put them online and sold them. And then PayPal said, wait, hold up. You need a license to do this. You can't just do this. You have to have permission from Nike, you have to have permission from Jordan, you have to have permission from Timberland, you have to have permission from all these people, and you have to have a bona fide tax ID. My 19-year-old self did not know what any of that was. I didn't know anything about trademark infringement. I didn't know anything about anything. I just knew buy low, sell high, make money. So here I am railroaded again. And so I'm at a loss because now there are certain things that have happened in my life over time. I was selling those sneakers I was making good money too. I mean, 19-year-old kid, and I'm not trying to tell crazy stories. I am trying to tell crazy stories, but I'm not trying to tell crazy stories. But I was making a great deal of money for being 19. And so in my personal life, my parents got a divorce. And so they decided that the house that we grew up in, they were going to sell it. And I said, no, I'm making tons of money right now. I can pay your measly bills, it's nothing, it's pennies. I'm making good money. Let me keep the house. And so I didn't mention it before, but I have a brother and a sister. And so they were living there too. I'm like, so if you guys split and sell the house, then we all got to figure out where we're going to live. Let me just take it over. So they agreed to let me do that. On top of that, my sister had 2 kids, and I myself had a son. And I was 19 years old. Please don't do that. Wait until you're married. Oh my gosh, don't do that. Big mistake. I mean, I love my son to death. Big mistake. I love my son to death, though. I love he's a twinkle in my eye, but, I wish I could have waited 10 more years. Anyway, so I have this, I have people I have to support, people that I have to take care of. And so when I wake up and get this message from PayPal saying, we've frozen all your accounts and we have to just make sure that you can hand us in the right documentation, I was at a loss. Because now I've absorbed all this responsibility, I have all these mouths to feed, I have all these people depending on me, and now I can't provide. And there's no way, with not having an education, all I have is a high school diploma, without having an education, there was no way that I could make nearly that much money and take care of the responsibility I had. And so after a couple of months went past, I'm not able to sell sneakers anymore. The bills are still rolling and I'm still paying them. My savings is almost gone. I got to figure out something to do. And so one day I was just sitting around and I was quite sad about my situation. And somebody said, listen, I know you've never done it before because you didn't grow up like that, but if we go to Atlantic City and you give me $200, I can make it $800 in a matter of hours. So me, business mind thing, I'm like, well, that's 400%, or what the profit is 300, right? The profit is 300. But I'm like, that's a pretty good return in a matter of hours. What are you talking about? I'm talking about crack cocaine. I said, ooh, let me think about that. Then I looked at my bank account and I said, all right, let's do it. I don't have time to think about this. I got to make some money. I got to make these ends meet. And so one decision one day turned into a year, and I was a full-fledged drug dealer. And my lifestyle completely changed. And I started to behave in ways that I hadn't. And I learned the game. I learned everything there was to learn about drug dealing. And so I'm not here to really talk about that, but just know that in that one sentence, I'm talking about a dramatic transformation of who I was as a person and my character. And so inevitably, I got caught and I was arrested. First time being arrested with those serious charges and know that I was going to face some serious jail time. I panicked. I was like, okay, well, what are we going to do? So, I had some money left, got a lawyer. The lawyer said, listen, I can't stop you from going to jail. There's too much evidence against you. You're going to go to jail. My job basically at this point is to see if I can get you as little time as possible. But you're definitely going to jail. That wasn't very promising. And I was like, okay, so I had to come to grips with that. And so I started to like prepare myself mentally. I'm like, I watched Oz, I watched The Wire, I watched all these shows, I watched SVU, I watched Criminal Minds. Jail is a tough place. Let me get ready for it. So, I started running long distance. I was like, because if I got to fight in there, I don't want to go out in 10 seconds. I got to get my wind up, let me run, let me do all this stuff. And so, I started preparing, and then, so 2008, I went in and I was sentenced to 6 years in a New Jersey State prison with a minimum of 2 years parole and eligibility. So most people get two numbers when they get sentenced. One is the amount of time you owe the state, but the first number is the amount of time that you have before you can start to have access to community release programs and parole. So my number was 2 years, two and some change. And so when I got to prison, I realized, the first thing I saw when I got to prison was a bunch of black people. Correction, a bunch of black and brown people. That's the first thing I saw when I got to prison. And not having any kind of exposure to it ever, I said, that's interesting. And when I got to talk to a lot of the people who were there, I noticed that they were poor people. Poor like I've never experienced poor. I said, that's also interesting. But the dots didn't connect in my head in any way. The dots didn't connect for me at all. I just knew that here I am, another black man in America with a criminal conviction and a full life ahead of me. A life ahead of me that I'll have to live with this. And that was what was impressed upon my mind constantly. But as I looked around, I saw so many people that were like me in many ways, but not like me in many ways. It wasn't until I went to prison that I saw that my meager upbringing was still miles above what some people in this country are subjected to in terms of growing up and living. And so one random day I walked into the prison library because, as many of you probably know from just common knowledge, a way to pass the time in prison is reading. It doesn't matter what you're reading, as long as you can just kind of transcend that space through a book. And so I didn't even look, I just randomly picked the book off the shelf and I went back to my bunk and I started reading it. The book was called Warriors Don't Cry by Melba Beals, a book written a while back. But the book basically detailed the first-hand lived experience of what it was like to desegregate the Central School of Little Rock, Arkansas. So it was the story of the Little Rock Nine from the first-hand perspective of one of the little girls who was the first to desegregate the school. And as big as I was, as strong as I was back then, I was in my bunk bawling tears. People didn't understand why I was bawling, and it was because I read the first-hand account of what it was like to be confronted with extreme racism in this country. She recounted stories of parents day in and day out lining the sidewalks like a picket with signs with racial slurs and racial undertones and just abrasiveness, shouting at them day in and day out, "You don't belong here, get out. You don't belong here, you shouldn't be here." A bunch of racial slurs. Some parents even went as far as to hit them and kick them. One day somebody threw acid at them. In school, the abuse continued. The teachers would turn a blind eye while students would jump on them, beat them up, spit on them. And I mean, this was not something that was one-time occurrence. They faced this day in and day out. And so many of them didn't make it. They stopped going, midway through. They said, this is too much. But Melba's grandmother said, what you are working toward now is much greater than you could ever imagine. And you staying is much more important than you giving up. And so she stayed. Chased home every day, scratched, kicked, beaten, bruised. And so in my cell, I thought to myself, how dare I have the audacity to become bored with school, to be bored with education? Who do I think I am to just throw away something that was bought with the blood of people who came just decades before I was alive? Not even centuries, but decades. And so I started to read more about what the Black struggle has been in America. And in many facets. And so I started to reflect on history. And so I started to read more about what slavery was like, and we all learned about slavery, but what I was shocked about is what I learned about, what shocked me is what I learned about our history after slavery. Many people don't know that in this country, when slavery was abolished in 1865, it sunk the economy of the South because free labor, there's nothing better than free labor in a business. That's your biggest cost. And so by sinking that free labor, there had to be something that happened as a result of that to make up for it so that the South didn't completely lose their economy. And so what many people don't know is that after slavery ended, there was a period that happened after called convict leasing. And through convict leasing, many Southern plantation owners, many Southern farmers re-enslaved Black people by charging them with criminal convictions. Because in the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, it says, slavery is abolished whereby blah, 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 legal jargon, except if you have a criminal conviction. And so by that, through the law, it was legal to re-enslave people through convict leasing. And arguably, in the book by Douglas Blackman called Slavery by Another Name, it talks about convict leasing. And it talks about how the conditions for those people once re-enslaved through the legal system were much harsher than slavery, because if a plantation owner bought a slave, that was an investment. You wanted that slave to perform, you wanted that slave to produce. You fed that slave, you made sure that slave had clothing, you made sure that, as meager as it was, you made sure that slave had clothing, you made sure that slave had shelter. But if you grab a convict who you didn't buy, who you just can go to the courthouse and grab for your plantation, you don't care about that person. You work them tooth and bone until they die and go get another one. The 13th Amendment, the clause in the 13th Amendment that permitted convict leasing is still in effect today, as written. And so moving through convict leasing, that lasted for a while. And then there were systems of peonage where, you would get a piece of land from a landowner for a debt that you could never repay. And you couldn't produce enough to ever pay the debt, so you would continue tilling the farmer's land and working the land until you died. And you didn't get the money, you didn't get the land, your family didn't get the land because you had a debt. So that was in effect for a while. And so that brings us up to the 1920s, and then I learned about, places like Tulsa, Oklahoma, 1921, Black Wall Street, suburb in Tulsa, suburb in Oklahoma, that was bombed. Straight up, just a community of Black folk who were doing economically well, and their suburb was just bombed due to racism and jealousy. And so I'm learning all of this stuff, and I'm like, well, why? How do we get here today? How do we get here today where we warehouse Black people at such an alarming rate? Charlie mentioned a figure. We represent America, the entire America. We represent 4% of the world's population. There's about 320 million people here. 5% of the world's population. 25% of the world's incarcerated population. But this is the land of the free. And while preparing for this talk, I was watching a video by a lawyer named Brian Stevenson. Brian Stevenson is a Harvard Law grad, founded the Equal Justice Initiative in Alabama. And since the late 70s, his work has been fighting for people who have been wrongly convicted and sentenced to death due to our criminal justice systems and its inherent racial bias. And his organization has identified at least 1 in 9 people in Alabama alone who have been innocent but sentenced to death and has went on to become exonerated. And he talks about some other disparities, but he said one thing that just stuck with me. Every time I listen to that talk, you can watch it, just Brian Stevenson TEDx something, or maybe it's not TEDx, it's TED. Brian Stevenson TED Talk, you can look at it, it's very powerful. One of the things that he mentioned to me was, not mentioned, I wish. One of the things that he mentioned that stuck with me was this. He said he went to give a talk in Germany about the death penalty and how he believes that the death penalty is fundamentally wrong and that we should get rid of it as a world. We should never execute somebody. Instead of thinking about the death penalty in terms of does the person have a right to die, think about it like, do we have a right to kill? If you think about it like that, it kind of changes the way we process this whole death penalty idea. And I'm not here to really talk about politics, your beliefs are what they are. But he said, after that talk, a woman came up to him and she said, it's hard for me to really process the stuff you're talking about because we don't have the death penalty in Germany. Of course, we could never have the death penalty in Germany. It would be unconscionable. And I'm almost quoting him verbatim there. It would be unconscionable. And can you imagine, and he goes on to say the same thing that I'm saying right now, these are not my words. He said, can you imagine if we lived in a world where the nation state of Germany systematically executed people? It would be unconscionable, especially if those people were disproportionately Jewish. Yet in America, given our colored history, no pun intended, we can warehouse African Americans and poor people and people of color, and there's just a stunning silence. And that's because we live in very insulated communities, We don't live in a community where we're confronted with prison. We don't live in a community where we have to think about prison. We live in our communities that are very safe in most cases. I'm thinking about America at large. Communities are very safe. Communities are very privileged as it relates to the rest of the world. But there are some people in this country who live a very, very different life. And we often don't think about that. And so that's why I'm proud to be a part of the PD Bean program, and I'm proud to have the opportunities that I had. When I was in prison, it was one day, literally one day, random day. I was in line to get my lunch. Call it mess movement. I don't know what you call it here. They call it mess movement. I'm in my line to get mess. It was literally like the voice of God came over my head. And I kid you not, I know that sounds weird, I know that sounds crazy, but literally. The voice said, don't eat your food right now, put it away. We have little like Tupperware bowls that we put in microwaves and stuff. So I put my food in the Tupperware bowl and I tucked it away. And so I'm just listening to this voice at this point, but I'm not like in a trance or nothing. Like it's not nothing spooky. I just, I kind of hear something talking to me, but I got a clean bill of health, so my mental health is pretty stable. So I'm listening to this voice though, and the voice says, go outside. And so it wasn't like I could just walk outside though. We were in like a full minimum unit and there was like a basketball court like right on the other side. So we were allowed to go out there. So I went to the basketball court and I sat down on the bench. And it was the first time ever in prison where I found myself alone. One of the things prison does is it takes away your privacy. You have absolutely no privacy. Anything that you do right now in your life, no matter what it is, anything you can think of, imagine somebody else being there. No matter what it is. There's nothing that you can think of that you can say to me that you can do in prison alone. Somebody's always there. So this place, I was by myself. And I was sitting on a bench and a teacher came out. One of the teachers in the prison came out and she said, hey, Walter. She said, hey, Miss Suzansky, how are you? She said, I'm well. She said, what are you thinking of? You're going home pretty soon. What are you thinking about doing? I said, you know, Ms. Suzansky, I would really, if possible, like the opportunity to go back to school. She said, oh, really? Well, whereabouts would you like to go? And now, so part of the story I didn't tell you was the day before, I spoke with a gentleman about possibly, far-fetched idea like this, something that may be in the works, we don't know. But he said Rutgers may be a school that you could go to. There's a program that's starting up that is trying to help people who have been formerly incarcerated. So Mrs. Yancey, so that voice comes into my head, say Rutgers, say Rutgers. So I'm like, well, Rutgers. And she like looked at me like I was a ghost first and then kind of jumped back and said, I can't believe you just said that because I was just getting ready to introduce you to a professor here who visited the prison, who actually is starting a program to help formerly incarcerated people go to college. His name was Professor Donald Roden. And so, long story short, Professor Roden did all he could to get me and other people like me into college through the special program. And once I got there, you know, thinking about Melba Beals, thinking about Warriors Don't Cry, thinking about the Little Rock Nine, I said, there is no way in hell, excuse my language, there's no way that I would let this opportunity pass. And so I was the one, you know, biggest guy, I've always been a big guy, biggest guy in the class in the front, with my hand raised, you know, asking questions. I'm 20 minutes early for class, because, you know, there are good students in college who come early so they can get the front row seats. Nah, you're not gonna beat me. I'm coming, I'm beating you. I'm getting that front row seat. It was that serious for me. It was that serious because I knew the ramifications, given all I learned, given the history, I knew the ramifications of having a criminal conviction in this country and understanding that I'll put myself in a situation that now I'll be forever judged and I have to work twice as hard for half as much. And so when I got affiliated with the PD Green program through Charlie and Jim, Charlie's really modest, but Charlie is the brainchild behind the PD Green program. PD Green was a disc jockey in DC and an influential radio personality who happened to also find himself in prison. And he met Charlie shortly after he was released, and Charlie served as a mentor to him and a good friend. And one day in DC, PD Green became to be this influential personality, kind of like a conduit politically between Washington and the Black community. You know, he was a really big name. And so he walked into this auditorium at the Dr. Martin Luther King Library. Charlie walks in, and PD Green's giving this speech. And in the middle of it, he says, stop, wait. I just want to acknowledge this man that walked in the room talking about Charlie and said, if it wasn't for this man, I wouldn't be who I am today. And so Charlie, PD Green later died of cancer. Over 3,000 people attended his funeral. And Charlie came up with the idea to start the PD Green program in his name and in his honor, where undergraduate students would go into prisons and tutor. And Charlie took his idea and his own money and funded it since 2007 and still funds it today. And so when I got affiliated with the PD Green program, understanding that solidarity, somebody who didn't know prison, somebody who didn't know the life that is very different from the person who will go to prison in this country, but thought it not robbery to say, I want to step up and do something about this. I want to have some compassion. I want to use my privilege to make the world a better place. I want to use my privilege to make the world different. That type of solidarity attracted me to the program. And his classmate, the director of the program, Jim Farron, another amazing gentleman. Charlie charged Jim, run the program. I can't do it, I'm over here, run the program. So Jim's like, no, I don't think about it, but he eventually came around to doing it. And when trying to get the program off the ground, he approached Cornel West, lecturer, professor at Princeton and Union Theological Seminary. He approached Cornel West. Cornel West is an activist, and name recognition alone would be great for the program. And so Jim, the director, Charlie's classmate, walked into Cornell's office and there's stuff all over the place. Cornell's a very rambunctious gentleman. He said, Jim, how can I help you? And Jim said, you know, Cornell, I'm starting this program, undergraduates are going to prison, and I want to know if you'll be an advisor. I want to know if you'll be on our board of trustees. Cornell said, Jim, before I help you, I got one question for you. If you get the answer right, I'll help you. I'll give you everything, I'll give you anything you want. You get the question wrong, don't talk to me anymore. Cornell West. So Jim, nervous. What is it? When you look through those bars, Jim, what do you see? And Jim thought about it, and he said, I see somebody that could have been me had the circumstances been different. And Cornell West jumped up from his desk and said, Jim, give me a hug. I'll do whatever you want. And they embraced. And Cornell West has been a part of the PD Green program in very, powerful ways ever since. But it was that solidarity, it was the compassion, it was the understanding that that could be me if the circumstances had been different, is what Cornell West was looking for. Because in America right now, there's just a lot of judgment, there's a lot of doubt that's cast, there's a lot of projection on people who have been formerly incarcerated. And had it not been for Dr. Roden, I wouldn't be here today. Had it not been for Charlie, I wouldn't be here today. And so many others. You know, he mentioned that I got a prestigious scholarship and I went to Cambridge. That's actually not an exception. That's actually getting exposed to exceptional opportunity. Opportunity that is void in certain places. Opportunity that does not exist, even before you go to prison. Getting exposed to exceptional opportunities. There are so many people who have done exceedingly well after prison once they got exposed to exceptional opportunity. So I said all that to say that there's a lot going on in this world and in our very own country that we are insulated from, that we don't ever have to see, never have to acknowledge. And that is a reflection of our privilege, not the way things are. And it is incumbent upon all of us to use our privilege to do something about it. Thank you so much for your time. I'm open for questions if anyone has any. Please don't be shy, I answer anything. Let me just say off for the record, yes, prison food really does suck.
I don't want to take time away from, but what I was thinking about today was this was the first day of the trial of the Zernaya surviving brother, who, together with his brother, had bombed the Boston Marathon in 2013. And that this phase of the trial is the punishment phase. Do you give him life in prison, albeit without parole, or do you kill him? And I think, from what I'm hearing, that that is the question of the character of our people. What do you do in a situation where there's no hope for this person? None. And it gives me a lot to think about because our daughter, who lives in Boston, if she hadn't decided to get something to eat with her friend walking to the end of the marathon, the finish line, she wouldn't be with us today. It's a lot to think about.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that comment. Thank you. Yes. Okay. Someone else? Yes.
You talked about how like a bad public school system, especially in a place like Philadelphia, and how poverty and a difficult upbringing like that can result in someone like yourself finding yourself in jail. But you didn't mention at all the breakdown of the traditional family and quite frankly, break down the traditional black family, which I think. Well, I guess my question is, how much do you think that is responsible for the epidemic of African Americans finding themselves in jails?
Absolutely. No, there are many things that I didn't talk about that all play a role in, why we are where we are as a country and with our disproportionate incarceration rates. None of this stuff happens in silos. And so when I was at Cambridge, I actually studied criminology and tried to, pinpoint why these things happen. And what I learned very, very quickly is that there are tons of theories. There are leading criminologists who have, theories. You have broken windows theory, you have hotspot policing theory, you have all these different types of theories that try to explain why. And all of them only marginally describe why, because we live in a very fluid society, so that we don't live in silos. We don't live in an economic silo. We don't live in a social silo. We don't live in a racial silo. Like, it's all just a melting pot. And so there are many different reasons why, certain things happen. But when we talk about the Black family, one of the myths, there's a lot of myths that are spread through the media. And I say myths because when you actually study and read demographics and read, not polls, but you read population statistics, you read certain things, there are just as many single parent homes in white communities as there are in Black communities. There is really no difference. And I talked about us living in insulated communities. We also live in very segregated communities as a result of redlining and housing discrimination and people wanting to keep neighborhoods all purely white. Many times people, if they lived in a predominantly white neighborhood, were forced out by terror or violence. In many neighborhoods, lenders would not lend if you wanted to buy a property, if you were Black and wanted to buy a property. Like FHA was a big part of what created the white suburban middle class back after the Depression. And so, so if you want to talk about the breakdown of the Black family, you have to acknowledge that there is no difference between Black and white families, number one. But number two, ghettos, and I don't like the word ghettos because that's a loaded word in and of itself, but urban areas that are dense and predominantly Black are a construction of the aftermath of what took place beforehand. And so when you think about the effect of all of that, the effect of racism going from overt in your face, certain social things that were changed to more institutional. The fact that you can be denied housing because you're Black. Nobody's going to say it, but you can be denied housing because you're Black. You can be denied access to education because you're Black. That forces people into underground ways of survival, underground means of making money. Often, my situation, where I have to make ends meet, but I don't have the education or the connections or the family or the capital to do it, and I made a decision that was poor. But when you think about the Black family, is it plagued with problems? Absolutely, but no more than any other demographic. And so to understand that as a reason why incarceration looks the way it does is, I believe, and personally believe, incorrect.
The students can ask, I can ask you.
Are you sure? Okay, you're so patient. You're so patient. Thank you. Yeah.
So these college students are like a small part of the American population. What can we, high school students and younger students, do to help with this issue?
That is the perfect question, and that's exactly what I'm here to talk about. One of the things that we're trying to do with the PD Green program, and there are other programs like it, but we're partial to the PD Green program, is spread it to as many colleges and universities as possible. And you will hear it on your university campus very, very soon, if not, unless you go to a school where it already is, and join it. Our director, Jim, and we have a promotional video online where we talk about what we do. And Jim says, a lot of people, especially kids, are looking for ways to serve, ways to give back. They think you have to go to Malawi or Indonesia or some developing country to serve. He said, you can go 20 miles down the road to a prison and there are people there in desperate need of education. Those are his words almost verbatim. I told you I have a good memory, I can just do that. Understanding that, and I don't want to, I don't want to sound political when I say this, but understanding that the difference between you and somebody in prison has less to do with anything about you intrinsically as much as it has to do extrinsically. And so when you change the surroundings and change the environment, anything is possible. And so understanding that just now, as long as you have in your mind that, we live in an unfortunate world that does unfortunate things to unfortunate people. And no matter what that is, you do something about it. But when you get to college, join the PDB program, be a tutor, and go in there and help people get an education.
Could I just say something? And this picture on the back here is my favorite because who's getting the most out of this? The guy she's tutoring or the guy, or she? You could really argue that point for a long time because I think that probably she's getting maybe a little more than he's getting. And you guys hopefully will have the opportunity to have some excuse, should I say, to go out and meet people who have had a very different life than you, and you'll find a tremendous amount of satisfaction in finding that they are very appreciative of your presence and you are appreciating their presence.
Thank you, Charlie. Yes, please. You and Blazer. Yeah.
Unfortunately, the world we live in, one of the few ways to really affect change with a federal or state program is through Congress. So if there was one piece of reform or legislation that you could pass right now, what would it be?
That's a great question. And right now, the political pendulum is swinging in the direction of criminal justice overhaul. I'm pretty sure, since you brought it up, you're familiar with the REDEEM Act that Rand Paul and Cory Booker are kind of co-sponsoring in a bipartisan effort to get through Congress. We'll see. But I think one of the most detrimental things that can happen to somebody is not even going to prison. In my experience and in my studies and in my humble opinion, the most damaging thing that happens to somebody is getting a criminal conviction. There are many people, there are 2.4 million people in prison, but there are over 6 million people under some form of custody, probation, parole, house arrest. Those people have to do those things, but they'll come out with a criminal conviction. And at the end of the day, whether you're applying to buy a home, whether you're applying to school, whether you're applying for car insurance, everyone wants to know, have you been convicted of a felony? And so, without pathways to expungement, there's no reason that somebody committing a crime should have to go through the rest of their lives dealing with it after they've served their time and paid their associated fines and paid their debt. There's no, in my opinion, these are very political statements, and I'm not asking you to agree with me, but to go on and have to do everything. I talked a little bit about my story, but right now it's not about me, it's about why it's important and incumbent upon us to do something about what's going on in this country. But personally, after I got out of prison, I completed parole, but I started Rutgers, and I graduated with honors. In my junior year, I was awarded the Harry S. Truman Scholarship for public service. It's like 1 out of 53 people in the country that got it. The only one, it's usually one from every state, unless it was a big state, they have two. I was the one from New Jersey in 2012. I have published work because I worked as a researcher in the nutrition lab and in an exercise physiology lab. I was a part of 2 honors programs, the School of Arts and Sciences honors program and the departmental honors program. I won several other scholarships. I got admitted to Cambridge and was ready to go. I applied for a visa so I could live there, applied to immigration. And they originally said no, said you have a criminal conviction. And if it wasn't for the network that I had of people who could write letters on my behalf and really try to get them to change their decision, which thank God they ultimately did, after doing all of that, I wouldn't have been able to go. And so I think that's the one thing outside of the fact that we warehouse people at alarming rates and use them as slaves, I didn't even get into private prison companies and how they lobby to keep more people in prison. Like, that's another story. The criminal conviction is the most damaging because it's hard to transcend, if ever. Yes.
Would you guys ever consider like going into urban communities and like trying to help at-risk youth before they end up in these drugs? Like I know a couple people, like one of them is my personal friend, who's like already been to juvie and like even though he's looking for outlets to like, you know, improve himself, he can't find resources. And I was like, this is a good program. Would you guys consider it?
Absolutely. I think that personally, as it relates to the PD Green program, I think that that's currently outside of the scope of what we do now, but there are plenty of organizations that are trying to, deal with the inner city troubles that, again, when you look at the history of things and the construction, the way this country was constructed over time, that didn't just happen. There's a reason why those areas are like that. But to answer your question, as far as the PD Green program goes, what we do is very specific, and it has to be that way. When you guys start, when the do-gooders in here start working in the nonprofit world, you're going to learn how specific you have to be, how measurable your goals have to be if you want funding. And so what we offer is an unparalleled, nothing like it in the country, first of its kind, high-quality tutoring program for people who are in prisons currently pursuing their high school diploma. And we do some college tutoring as well. I said do. We do some college tutoring as well for their gentlemen, men and women across the state of New Jersey who are taking college courses. But we have to have that specificity to be a functional program. So, but to answer you, in regards to your question, there are tons of organizations who are trying to do that. One of the difficult things we tend not to understand when we come from a place of privilege and a place where we don't have to live to those certain conditions is the economic stress that pushes us into certain behaviors and lifestyles. I mean, can you imagine not having lights in the house for a week? We complain about Wi-Fi not reaching certain spots in the house, right? Like, can you imagine like not having lights for a week or not knowing where your next meal is coming from? That changes your whole focus and why we do certain things. So, I mean, I know I'm going way off, but I think those programs are effective, but there has to be there has to be a revolution of infrastructure almost in the way things happen in those neighborhoods for there to be a true and lasting effect, in my opinion. Yes. I'm going to work my way up, so I'm going to go. Yeah.
Okay, so it's very apparent throughout your talk that a lot of decisions that you've made have gotten you to where you are today. One of those being your decision to start in the crack cocaine business. But that has gotten you to where you are now doing this work. So my question is, if you could go back to that moment, would you have made the same decision?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say because on one hand, I'm happy to be where I am now, talking to you great people here, trying to champion a good cause. I don't know the path that my life would have taken had I not gone to prison. Again, I was here to tell stories, but not stories. In that 1 year when I decided to sell drugs, 6 times I know of, I was almost killed. So, on one hand, had I continued to go, maybe that 7th or 8th time would have been the one. One thing that I would tell myself back then is that money doesn't equal happiness. Like just having a volume of money doesn't equal. I was chasing money. I thought money was the key to happiness. The key to happiness is finding your purpose. I believe that all of us have a purpose and we're all here to do something. Figuring out what that is can make you happy. Because there was one point where I had a lot of money and I had a house. I took over the house my parents were living in, so that was technically like my first house. But I was by myself and I was miserable. So I don't think that I would change it because I love who I am today and I found purpose. I'm going to come back to you. You first.
Given the relative gradual collapse of the prison system in America, also combined with more anti-racist things like affirmative say 10 or 15 years?
I think we have to be very careful when we understand progress. Again, if history is our teacher, you know, we have to understand that the reason why, I mean, like, so in slavery times, it was illegal to read. If you were a slave, you were not allowed to know how to read. If you were a male and you got caught reading, you were castrated. You know, if you were a female, you had genitalia mutilation. Shortly after, we have Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. You know, we have Brown versus the Board of Education. So we understand it. We understand, you know, this idea of affirmative action, more Black people going to college. It can be articulated and stated one way due to the way our politicians talk about it, or we can talk about the fact that in this country, Black people for 400 years, and I know the country's only 230-some years old, but you know, 1619 at Jamestown is when we first got here. Black people have been struggling to get rights that whites have always enjoyed. And so, in this country, when we look at mass incarceration, we look at the fact that, you know, in Black communities, they're still not achieving at the same rates. That's more a reflection of oppression, not a reflection of that community. And so, in 10, 15 years down the line, it's going to be important for all of us to acknowledge, which is something that is very hard to do in this country, to have these hard conversations about our history, to be truthful about the things that were done to certain groups of people. And so collectively, a critical mass of us has to acknowledge that and then work to undo that. If that happens, then there can be real change. But what usually happens is that there is a system of oppression that's constructed, and then it takes years to deconstruct, and then it comes up a new way, and a new way, and a new way. And so in our history, we have slavery, we have convict leasing, we have separate but equal, we have mass incarceration. Those are all systems of oppression that continue to be erected in the country, and people, activists, you know, or community organizers work to dismantle it. But until we all can get on the same page and acknowledge that we are one human race and we all should have the same rights, access, privilege, opportunities, it's only going to keep doing that, in my opinion. Again, I know that can be very political for some people, in my opinion. Yes, you're next.
Can any undergraduate go and help out with the PD Green program, or do they have to major in certain subjects?
Any undergraduate can help out with the PD Green program. It does not matter your major. As long as we have a chapter in that school, you can go. Another thing you can do, no matter what school you go to, we have a website on the back of the brochure. In your freshman year, we highly encourage all of you, if the program is not there, to start it. Because there are prisons everywhere. I promise you that there will be a prison, you know, an hour away from your school, tops, no matter where you go in the country. Since 1980, for example, if you go, anybody going to California, since 1980, California has built one university, they built 20 prisons. You will have one to go to. So definitely, go through our website, fill out the contact form, say I'm a freshman I saw somebody walking around with a Wake Forest shirt, we're there, but I'm a freshman at UC Berkeley, I want to start a PD Green program. Let's do it. Yes. Yes. I'm sorry, sometimes my eye strays when I look long distances, so it might not look like I'm looking at you, but I'm looking at you.
So from your personal experience, do you think that your term is too long? Do you think that people are serving longer than they need? And do you think that our people are getting enough opportunity to get out early and start engaged?
So I went to prison for selling drugs. I don't think anybody should go to prison for drugs. That's just my personal opinion. Again, very political. But I feel like we have made the prison system in this country a catch-all for people that are socially undesirable for some reason, one reason or another. More than half the people in the prison system have developmental disabilities or some type of mental issue. Many of the people in the prison are poor. Many people in the prison are racial minorities. I think that in many ways we just abuse what prisons are. I mean, we've over-criminalized society. I forgot what I was reading, one thing where they tried to make yoga pants illegal. Like, you can go to prison for wearing yoga pants somewhere in this country. I really believe that in many ways, I mean, do we need a criminal justice system? Yes. Does it have to be a prison? That's debatable. You know, we do it one way in America, but I was just talking to Dr. Miller about the way they do it in the Scandinavian countries. Fundamental difference from the way we do it here. In some Scandinavian countries, no matter what you did, you cannot get more than a 20-year sentence. And the prison looks better than this campus, because they actually put resources into it to try to figure out what went wrong with this individual. But in America, we kind of have this insatiable thirst for punishment and atonement and revenge. You know, that's why we have the death penalty. You killed me, I'm gonna kill you. That's not the way it has to be. And as it relates to my prison sentence, I don't know if I would have sent me to prison as much as I would have, you know, said, okay, well, you're not supposed to sell drugs because it's against the law, but here are some opportunities for you to actually make, you know, paying my price, you know, doing whatever the punishment was, but these are the opportunities that you need if you want to live a successful life. I mean, just imagine if our prison system did that. Imagine if our prison system took people and said, you need to go to school, here's a scholarship. And that seemed like a radical idea, right? But we spend $50,000 anyway incarcerating them. So you're going to spend the money one way or the other. You know, so that sounds like a really radical idea, but I am on the far left of the prison discussion.
One more question, and then people could come up and speak because it's getting late. We want to wrap it up. Maybe last question. I know Sharon.
I have, unless there's a student.
I think Charlie had a quick comment.
I'll be very quick. I feel very strongly that prisons need to be reformed. The guards are hired, understandably, I suppose, to stop riots within the prison and obviously keep people from escaping the prison. But why aren't they also charged with doing what they can to give encouragement to the inmates? I'm sure there's many COs, correctional officers, that do just what they can do, and that's wonderful. But I think that we ought to ask our prisons to emphasize that while these guys and some women are in prison, do what you can to make their lives such that when they get out, as almost all do, they can be productive as possible.
Sharon, why don't we wrap it up with your question, please?
In terms of the measurables
Yes.
and how effective the tutoring program is, you went to a very highly regarded high school. I'm very familiar with the high school you went to. You had two parents who had to work hard to make ends meet, never went to sell drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Early on, it was instilled in you that education was important.
Absolutely.
Someone at your high school failed you, someone at Drexel failed you. There should have been a way for you to afford Drexel. I don't know why you didn't get that information, or maybe you didn't want it at the time. I don't know. So you already understood, before you found your own choices and were in prison, you understood that education was important.
Yes.
How many of the participants in the program came from an early understanding like you did, a family that was committed to trying to make the best of any opportunities? Are those the most successful participants in the program, or do you see across the board even the people who grew up, whose parents said education doesn't matter, or I don't know enough that it matters, had no opportunity? Do you see your background makes a bigger difference in who's successful?
I have to be completely honest with you, I don't. And so when thinking about your question, I'm particularly thinking about the Mountain View program. That's the name of the program that helped me get into Rutgers, the Mountain View program. And we come from a diverse, number of backgrounds. But the success is very, very similar in a lot of ways. I mean, people have their abilities to do what they do, and their level of commitment matters, and their drive matters, all that matters. But on average, the GPA of the Mountain View program at Rutgers is higher than the average GPA of the rest of the school. And so I don't think that we can control for backgrounds to try to understand the success. But one of the things that I can say is that when we think about one's ability to learn and their ability to perform. You know, when I went to prison, I had some college. I went to Temple. So I had my high school diploma. I went to go to college. And so they give you this test. It's called the Test of Adult Basic Education. It's called the TABE test. And it only goes up to a 12th grade level. And so they put it in front of me, and I'm thinking, is this a joke? It's like I scored a perfect score on the test. You know, and they said, well, we've never had somebody do that before. You can be a TA. And so I started tutoring guys one-on-one, you know, just giving them my attention, devoting my time. You know, it was another way to pass the time. And so there was this guy, his name was Paul. Paul was a good friend of mine. Paul was from Newark. Paul was like, you know, he was also another drug dealer. He had been to prison a few times. He tried going to school, and you know, they have laws like No Child Left Behind, so in a lot of inner city schools they're just passing kids along, kids are not really passing. Paul was a victim of some of those policies in overcrowded classrooms and, you know, teacher neglect in some cases due to a big caseload. I'm not bashing teachers or the educational system in one way. I'm just trying to talk about the nature of it in a lot of these communities. Long story short, though, Paul was on the 4th grade level of math. Paul was 30. Paul was on the 4th grade level of math. But Paul really wanted to pass the GED because he wanted to go home to his family, particularly his mother, and show them, I can do it. And Paul and I, at the end of the day, worked hard. We worked hard. I mean, we went fractions to percents. And in 3 months, Paul took the TABE test again. And Paul tested on the 9th grade level. The acumen of somebody, you know, the intellectual acumen of somebody has, I think, little to do with their surroundings, but, and I say that in a very relative sense, but it's more to do with how much it's stimulated. How much attention was Paul getting before he got to prison for his second time? You know, how much attention was he getting? Who was giving him the time that I was giving him, or who was supposed to be beforehand? And so to answer your question, in the Mountain View Project, you know, I am just one of many stories from many different backgrounds. We have people who don't have parents, people's parents were killed, people who grew up in foster care, people who grew up with drug-addicted parents, people who grew up with parents in prison, and they're doing amazing things. Just to give you an example, the Truman Scholarship that I won, Rutgers University as a university hadn't won the scholarship in 11 years. And I had won the scholarship, and they kind of made some headlines because it was like a big deal. Like, not only did they not win it for a long time, but they gave it to somebody who wanted prison. Like, geez, crying out loud. And the very next year, someone else from the Mountain View program went on to win the scholarship. And he then, in his senior year, won a loose scholarship, you know, people from PBS. And now he's working in Thailand, with the Thai government, working with preventative measures for people who suffer with drug addiction. So, yeah, my family definitely had an effect on me and who I am and instilling in me educational values. But I don't think that gave me the upper hand after prison, once I went to prison. You know, it definitely helped out. If I didn't go to prison, it would put me eons above people who have gone to prison. But once I went to prison and was branded with that criminal conviction, my education didn't matter. Because like I said, you know, I almost couldn't go to Cambridge because I had a criminal conviction. And so once you get that conviction, you know, it doesn't matter. I know I'm kind of straining it. I'm answering your question in a lot of ways, but a straight answer to your question is, I don't think that had as much influence as one might think because of the accomplishments of so many of those around me who also have criminal convictions.
Folks, I want to thank Walter, but I also want to thank Charlie, who thought, as a friend of Blair, and thought of us. He was in Michigan when he called me. It's just wonderful to have people call us up and say, I have something important and interesting to for a program at Blair. And lastly, I want to thank Jim Youngelson for being a wonderfully loyal and supportive Blair alumnus who began this idea of ethics and responsibility. And I think we can all agree Walter is an embodiment of ethics and responsibility. Thank you.